Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you Chapter 8 of the Veil Riders, Book 4. Like, subscribe, comment down below, join the Discord, join the coffee, follow me on X. Chapter 8. Surprise, motherfucker. First Sergeant! Yule called out, watching the smoke rounds hit and billow one after another as they created an approach to the tree line. Erinda Caine emerged from the curves and corners of the trench line in good order, though she was still brushing shards of tree from her hair and shoulders as she ran up to Yule.
Yes, Yule.
They've taken the bait, Yule muttered, pointing out with a bladed hand. They're going to try and punch through the holes they think they made. Get those big-ass rifles on those gaps. Erinda Caine looked out towards the snowfields, her slightly pointed ears flexing as she listened.
I hear engines.
Light armor or APCs, Yule said with a nod.
They'll be returning back to their motor pilsel with a few pieces missing.
Erinda Caine hissed out with a nod back to Yule, then took off at a jog. As Yule turned to stalk off towards the other warcasters, Henry and Curtis were watching the snowfield slowly fill with smoke.
That is a lot of smoke. Actually, how the hell do they even have that much smoke?
Henry asked, holding his rifle across his metal band t-shirt with crossed arms. Curtis flicked another shred of ruined tree off of his plate carrier, his Auto 5 shotgun held lazily on his shoulder. Either someone is magicking up more shells for them, or someone is out there in the tree lines messing with the smoke.
Do you think they're gonna charge in through the smoke?
Rusty murmured, one of the rare chances his lips were exposed as he had pulled up his check gas masks to sip from a can of cider.
It's a certainty at this point.
Lacune muttered, placing a hand to their still bleeding eye.
The smoke is going to cover their charge.
Huff came ambling down the trench line, stepping to the side as Yule bent down to speak to him. Huff smiled, then started jogging over to the little growing gaggle of humans.
This is gonna be good,
Huff said with a laugh, while a small unit of Knoll mercenaries and auxiliaries came jogging down the trench line. What are you on about, Huff? Moose asked as he came around the corner from the other end of the trench line. Huff clapped Rusty on the shoulder, making him sputter his cider.
Apparently we're setting up an ambush. Come on, we're taking this lot down to the quote-unquote hole they made with their artillery.
The humans gave Huff dubious looks, but set off with him, their auxiliary helpers in tow. By the time they reached the first hole, Yule had already grouped up his warcasters, along with Erinda Caine, and had briefed them on what he wanted them to do.
It is possible.
A brim-touched sergeant murmured, running her thumb down the side of her cheek.
We could focus the simple air spell and let it wash across the snowfields.
A Valley Elf specialist looked out to said fields, his ears flexing. Regardless of what we can do, we need to hurry up and make our minds up. The engines are getting closer.
Let's get it done.
Erinda Caine said, slapping her first sergeant rank.
Focus in on me, and we can sweep the fields clear long enough for those gunners to knock out their vehicles.
Yule, having been holding the receiver to Riozo's radio, placed it back to his cheek. Alphonse.
Send it.
Came the reply into his ear. I want you to hip-fire those mortars into the snowfields, right along where those holes in that false trench line were made. Hang, fire, then start raining rounds back and forth. Just wing it, Yule said.
What lovely fire directions.
Alphonse said dryly.
When do we fire?
Keep those rounds hung until you hear the deep diggers go off, Yule replied.
Copy.
Alphonse said, and Yule could hear him yelling to the motorman when he gave Riozo the receiver. Yule then stood with his arms crossed next to Riozo, while Chicks and Domino stood beside him, all four of them staring out into the smoke-filled snowfields. How far away do they sound? Yule asked them, as his ears were ringing from the artillery still and he wasn't sure just how accurate they currently were. Chick shrugged.
100 yards?
More like 200,
Domino muttered.
but they are not going fast.
Yule turned down the line. Make ready! The call echoed up and down the line, and the gunners wielding the 15.5mm deep diggers bent forward, eyes pressed to their shielded reticles and muscles flexing with the weight of their weapon. Domino muttered, making Chick smile as Savarus came down next to them with a rush of wings and a light rattle of Himalaya Harpy battle armor. First Sergeant! Yule called out, and all of them braced as the wind suddenly stopped blowing at them. The air stood still for 6 heartbeats before the recoil of the spell thundered across the snowfields, bending wounded trees outwards and ripping needles from their limbs. The trees, too weakened to stand firm, blew over with sharp cracks and snaps, their trunks giving way and crashing to the ground. Everyone's vision was blinded by the green-flecked wall of snow that pulsed out towards the smoke, and riflemen waited patiently to see what lay before them out within the unknown. When the smoke was caught by the spell, it was blown up and away into the sky, leaving 10 strikers, 11 up-armored HMMVs, and nearly an entire battalion rolling their way with speed through the snowfields. Yule inhaled sharply, the size of the attack element so absurd that the amount of hardware coming at him caught him truly off guard. The enemy battalions seemed to be caught off guard as well, HMMVs breaking to a shuddering stop as they realized their smoke cover had been completely blown away. The smarter strikers immediately turned their wheels, hammering the gas pedal and speeding away towards the cover of the trees, and Yule reckoned they must have been crewed by humans. Cut them down! Yule bellowed, lurching his rifle up to his face and pulling back on the trigger. The entire gun line opened up virtually all at the same time, the rush of noise sudden and deafening. Yule made a mental note as he fired on full auto to get his hearing checked, or maybe have Yethis try and heal his eardrums. If he couldn't hear an entire battalion creeping up on him, either something was wrong or they were using magic to fuck with him. As the concussive thoom of the mortars firing echoed out to him, Yule also heard a few belchers crack, sending high explosive rockets hissing towards vehicles. The stronger of the deep digger gunners held down the hammer, letting his weapon rock on full auto as it hammered both the air around its barrel and the poor bastards in an HMMV dead ahead of him. The 15.5mm rounds punched cleanly through both the front windows and turret armor, leaving neat holes and bloody smears where people used to be breathing. The answering reply was immediate and devastating. The striker turrets and infantry attempted to gain fire superiority over the entrenched foes before them. Those still pointing their grills at the gaps they were told to charge spurred their vehicles onward, kicking up rooster tails of snow and dirt as they gunned their engines. Yule held out his hand towards Ryuzo, who ducked as a 30mm chain gun round sailed over their heads and brought the receiver to his face as soon as the Oni placed it in his hands. Alphonse!
Send it!
Alphonse screamed over the racket of the mortars firing. Enemy battalion in the open. Shift from Charlie 5 across the field. Danger close. Do not wait for hang. Rapid fire. Yule screamed, then tossed the receiver over his shoulder as someone nearby fired a belcher across the field into the flank of a striker who had turned to flee into the woodline. Kemp slammed into the wall from around the edge of the trench, his face blood-spattered and cheek partially blackened.
Yule!
What? Yule called out, giving short bursts of his rifle as he cast his eyes back and forth, seeing that 10 vehicles were already not moving or burning.
They're pulling back!
Kemp yelled, wiping the blood away from his face.
We caught them flat-footed!
If they're pulling back, that means they're calling in artillery! Yule screamed out, grabbing the front of Kemp's plate carrier and pulling the human towards him. Run down this line and make everyone take cover. They know where we are now. Kemp nodded curtly and took off at a sprint down the trench line. As the mortars fell in the snowfields, vehicles turned and ran as fast as they could either backwards or to their flanks, fleeing the impact zone of artillery and the accurate fire of the enemy anti-vehicle weapons. Infantry either made themselves as small as possible or took off after the vehicles, ducking and weaving through the mortars and raking gunfire.
Take cover!
Yule screamed, pushing Domino into Severus and throwing Chicks bodily into a nearby pillbox.
Take cover, goddammit!
Even as the mortars fired, the howl of incoming artillery filled the sky, and this time there was no luck at it hitting the false trench. The trees still helped greatly, catching rounds before they fell to the earth fully. But the only thing First Cab could do now was think small and hope the rounds didn't pull their number. The ground that was struck by the artillery rounds that cleared the trees erupted into splashes of snow and earth that loomed skywards, shattering the air and throwing debris down to those cowering within the trenches and cover. No one dared lift their head above the trench line, and those who were caught outside of it had long since dove under whatever offered them some solace of safety. The gnolls, having never been in an artillery strike, cowered and clung to the humans around them, whining with ears pinned and tails tucked as the sky thundered. The fire was fierce, rapid, and unrelenting, with 3 artillery rounds making solid impacts within the trench itself, though thankfully at an angle and on the back wall of the trench, dampening their true deadly effect. The artillery being at max range was a saving grace at the moment, their angles too steep. This of course was not to say that everyone was spared, and many auxiliaries met their end with a roar and sudden quiet. The artillery fell until the enemy forces were clear, leaving only the burning hulks of vehicles, the dead, and the wounded out in the snowfields. When the artillery fire ceased, Yule picked himself up from his mess of cover and looked around, his forehead speckling with blood from splinters. Yule blinked, hearing through the ringing in his ears the sounds of coughing and the cries of the wounded, and he shouted out while helping Ryozo to his feet. "Casualties!"
Light!
Hayden called out, though he was nearly as bloody as Kemp and had a shrapnel wound to his chest that was bleeding steadily.
Warcasters managed to get some barriers up.
Yethis came coughing along the top of the trench, her hair full of splinters and dirt.
17 SDC. No humans.
"Get off the wall," Yule barked, reaching up and jerking Yethis down into his arms. He held her for a moment as he checked her over, which made her blush slightly, then set her down on the ground, blinking through the dirt in his eyes. "Now they know exactly where we are. There's no hiding it now."
2 hours till nightfall.
Helena said, keeping her eye into the spotting scope and watching the enemy artillery battery closely. They had been shelling the line on and off through the day, and appeared to be quite at ease in their little zone of comfort. Gabriel exhaled out his nose, his face tense as he stared through his rifle optic.
They've been hammering the line for hours. How much longer are we going to wait?
We're lucky that force is hanging tight and not coming back.
Bubba muttered, tying together his last explosive bundle.
Our best chance of surviving this shit is nightfall.
His brother Buckwheat turned to look at him, canteen halfway to his lips.
You think they'll last till nightfall? You heard what they said on the radio. You also heard Yule tell us to make it count, and make sure we destroy the entire battery.
Bubba replied, finishing the knot.
They're entrenched. They'll last.
There is a limit to a trench.
Violet said from beside Roxanne, the two of them tying grenades together into bundles.
Eventually more rounds are going to hit inside that trench than outside, and it's going to wear down the defenses. Not to mention if they catch them outside the trench during resupply.
Roxanne nodded.
I wouldn't want to be them right now. It's at least better that we're here and we can relay to the scout harpies to give warning to the trench.
A small solace.
Willie muttered, his boot tip bouncing on the ground from nerves as he lay in the snow behind his Mark 47 mutant.
If we took them right now, we could save even more lives down near the town.
Bubba sighed out, setting his explosives all in a tidy row within his rucksack before switching to English.
Willie, I know we can do it now, but if we do, we ain't walking away from it. We have to either crawl or charge across open ground. They're gonna have time to react and put a lot of us down.
We have to also think of them.
Fritz said back in their mother tongue, jerking a thumb over his shoulder at the other auxiliary bowmen who were waiting patiently along with the humans.
We go charging in, they're going to get cut down. This was always going to be a stealth mission, and these bowmen are going to give us the time we need on the sneak.
Alaska also pointed to the auxiliaries, who were now paying attention, and answered Fritz in English as well.
Not to mention they have no idea how to deal with a combat movement like this. They would have been lost in the sauce and get cut down before they even made it halfway. We have to wait till nightfall to ensure we gank every gun they have, or it's all meaningless.
Helena, having been watching the humans, turned slightly to fully face them.
What were you saying to each other? I don't like it when you change to English. That means you're saying things you don't want us to hear.
It's nothing, Trooper.
Gabriel said from beside her, his eyes narrowed as he stared through his optic.
They're just talking about tactics is all. They aren't fully learned in Tonka.
Helena looked at Gabriel closely, trying to detect a lie, but gave up and ran a finger along the bottom edge of her eye patch.
Very well.
To Helena, this all felt very familiar, if just colder. As a matter of fact, she spent most of last year laying in wait to ambush and assault some area or another. The Hungarian horsebow hummed excitedly on her back, and she reached down to press a finger to it, letting it know that it was going to be used soon enough. The other bowmen idly ran wax along their strings, if just for something to do, while others counted and recounted their arrows, double-checking the fletching and tips. The staglings that brought them here had their own bows as well, but were not enjoying having to lay on their sides to avoid their horns giving away where they were all hidden. An hour passed with relative boredom that was laced with high-strung anxiety, many of them watching the sun slowly dip further down towards the horizon and cursing that the days were now becoming longer instead of shorter. The sun was not even fully under the trees when the artillery base suddenly lurched into action, the many gunners and crew members running from their vehicles, tents, and dugouts.
I have a lot of movement.
Helena called out quietly, fixing her eye to her spotting scope as she cast it along the line of guns. Multiple human heads came in line with hers, all of them staring through binoculars or optics.
They're lining up their shells. Looks like a big barrage is going to happen.
Roxanne murmured, casting her binocular across the howitzers.
They're getting every gun staged up.
Willie blinked and looked away from his binocular, then ran his gloved hand down his face.
Shit, we need to do it now, don't we?
Likely going to be a suppressing barrage for an assault.
Violet said, looking over to Alaska.
What do you think?
Alaska nodded.
Time to crawl. It's darker and they'll be too focused on getting their fire mission set up.
Agreed.
Gabriel said, then waved a hand to the bowman behind him and called out as quietly as he could.
Staglings, wait until the gunfire starts. The rest of you crawl after us.
Helena and the other bowmen unslung their weapons and started crawling along with the humans, all of them staying low in the snow as a male brim-touch specialist bit his thumb, muttering out a spell that made them all blend into the snow better. It was a horrible place to try and crawl through as snow kept creeping down the necks of their uniforms, but the darkness and chaos of the artillery base gave them plenty of leeway. The magical spell was taking up any other slack, though the staglings were still struggling to be stealthy. By some miracle, all of them made it to the ad hoc walls formed by piling both snow and bags of earth, and every trooper of First Cab was huffing and puffing from the exertion of low crawling for so long in the cold snow. Willie pulled out a small pocket mirror, one used by humans on the other side of the veil, and opened it with a click. All of the auxiliaries perked up to the small click and looked at the little pocket mirror with curious eyes. Working it upwards inch by inch, Willie popped the edge of the mirror over the top of the snow wall, peering up at the fractured glass and looking around at the line of artillery.
We're still almost 70 yards away.
Willie puffed out, his breath fogging in the air a little more thickly now that the sun had gone down completely.
We still have to run across the open.
There is some cover between us. We'll just have to be quick.
Violet said. Then her and Willie jerked down as a loud voice bellowed out in English. 7 rounds of smoke. We're rolling it in backwards so they can't blow it away. The voice bellowed out, and all the humans looked to each other with knowing eyes. Orders are to barrage 1 gun per grid coordinate when the attack starts.
Oh, shit, fuck.
Roxanne muttered in English, thumping her head against the snow.
We can't wait.
Staff Sergeant,
Helena murmured, crouching up so she was beside Gabriel.
what are our orders?
Gabriel's face soured as he chewed on his lip. Then he turned towards Helena.
Get the bowmen ready. I want rapid-fire arrows at any target when they're in range. The rest of us will prep grenades and explosives. Can you do that, Corporal?
We will do so.
Helena said with a nod, then turned to the other bowmen while ripping arrows out of her leg quiver and staging them in her bow hand.
We're going in fast and shooting on the run. If you're able to load arrows from the same hand or off the bow, do so.
Yes, Corporal.
The bowmen said together and all began to stage their own arrows. The first artillery piece roared, splitting the air as it fired
Yes,
a
Corporal.
smoke shell. Other artillery pieces starting their own cascading fire. Gabriel looked towards Willie and Bubba, then gave them a nod.
Ready?
Let's bag us some collars.
Bubba said, holding an explosive in one hand and his M14 in the other. Fritz spat a mouthful of bile into the snow, then nodded, clutching his acquisition grease gun he had taken from one of Mermella's retiring troopers.
Fuck, I always hate this part. Go!
Gabriel hissed, then lurched over the barrier wall along with all the other bodies. Due to the noise and flurry of activity, no one noticed the 15 men and women of First Cab make their way over the wall. Nor did anyone's attention get drawn to them as they quickly crouch-ran across the open-air storage area, their shoulders brushing past more artillery shells, primers, and crates of supplies. They ran 50 yards before Helena pulled her bow up, an arrow tight to her cheek, and loosed mid-run. The arrow whistled through the air and thudded deeply into the back of a man operating a radio a few feet from the first gun, the entire assembly sitting underneath an awning of lanterns and camouflage netting. He gave out a short cry, alerting those around him to turn around. A white Mountain Oni specialist pulled back on his massive war bow, his muscles bulging with the strain, and sent an Oni war arrow plunging into the chest of the man sitting beside the first victim. The arrow was so powerful that it buried itself up to the ends of the fletching within the Southern Elf's body, pinning him to the radio behind him. More arrows whistled and sang through the air, taking out the other man at the radio and half the crew to one of the howitzers. Willie took a toss explosive from Bubba, armed it, then sent it flying into a nearby bunk tent while kicking a crate over in front of the door flap. The staglings had jumped over the snow wall at the same time the bunk tent exploded with an air-ripping detonation, and the multiple gunnery crews spun around in shock, paused mid-reload of their guns. Gabriel whipped his head around to look at Bubba, his eyes wild as his ambush was dashed.
You fucking ruined it!
I set the fucking timer wrong.
Bubba howled as he dove down to avoid a rippling reply of rifle fire.
Just get the fucking gun!
Gabriel bellowed, raising his rifle and placing fire back at the enemy. Helena and the other bowmen kept up their fire, keeping themselves hidden by their lack of muzzle flash and plunging arrows into targets. The guns were close enough together that they could leapfrog forward, reloading their bows on the crouch as someone else went running by them, searching for a target and then releasing their arrow.
Get the gun, Fritz!
Violet shouted as she pulled the safety out of her stick grenade and sent it thudding through the air towards the next gun, the one beside her already cleared by the bowman. Her muscles were bulging with adrenaline, and the grenades looked like sticks in her hands as she threw another one. Fritz stumbled over a dead, arrow-riddled Southern Elf crewman and rolled back onto his feet, fumbling with 2 yellow sticks of explosives.
I'm fucking working on it!
React to fire! A voice rang out above the racket of gunfire and artillery cannons. We're being flanked! Willie raised his Mark 47 and started firing short bursts towards the second gun, both giving the advancing bowmen cover and suppressing the riflemen now lunging out from the dark to take battle to the enemy. A large American human male also loomed out of the darkness, shoulder firing an M240 Bravo that made his torque glitter with light. I want every gun on them. Stop firing smoke and switch to the other fire mission now. Protect the guns. Buckwheat dove for cover, having been trying to ready another explosive pack, but gave a howl of agony as multiple rounds from the M240 Bravo ripped through his shoulder and hand, 2 of his digits breaking away and cartwheeling through the air.
Bucky!
Bubba screamed out, turning to look at his brother and then ducking down as machine gun fire raked his position. Buckwheat gave out a panicked exhale as he looked down at his ruined hand, but still tried to ready the explosive with his bloody fingers.
I'm fine. Get us some cover.
Bubba wasted no time, mag dumping his M14 towards the enemy position and ripping a machete from its sheath on his belt. As the other humans poured fire into the enemy position, Fritz popped the fuse on an explosive and dumped it into the barrel of the first artillery piece, running up behind the bowmen who are now flanking around the second gun. Fall back to the 4th gun, go! The torque-bearing human shouted, and other humans ducked and ran backwards, their southern elf and orc troopers sprinting along beside them. The other M119 howitzers continued to fire, cracking the air as they fired high-explosive shells towards the trench line in the distance. Bubba let out a war cry as he lunged forward through the cover, running at full speed towards the M240 Bravo-wielding human who was trying to lace his rounds towards the bowman and Fritz.
Traitor!
Bubba howled as he loomed up and over the enemy cover, bringing his machete high. The human turned his head, then flipped around the M240 Bravo, ignoring the sizzling of his flesh as he gripped it by the ripping hot barrel.
Apostate!
Bubba tanked the sudden swing by the human as well as anyone could, the heavy machine gun cracking across his shoulder and chest and spinning him off balance, causing him to crash down into a pile of spent artillery brass. He was jerked quickly back to reality as the barrel of the first artillery piece exploded dully, blowing the barrel in half so that it drooped sadly towards the ground. It was the time required for the human to rip his cooked flesh from the barrel that allowed Bubba to regain his feet, and Bubba looked up with confusion as the seared, blackened flesh began to slowly knit back together.
What a load of bullshit.
Bubba grunted as the human pulled a dagger from his belt and roared out a challenge, Bubba lunging in with his machete. Violet was just coming in behind him, wielding a wicked-looking warhammer, and the two took to the human in a crushing double assailment, forcing him backwards as he parried with his dagger in a thick ammo box lid.
Mr. Fritz!
Helena called out, sinking an arrow into the chest of a southern elf that was trying to prime a grenade.
The cannon, Mr. Fritz!
Fritz blew snow and dirt out of his mouth from the first missed grenade and slammed another morphine pipette into the Oni bowman's leg, a stagling already tying a tourniquet around the Oni's massively shredded leg, while another stagling was attaching a drag lead to their plate carrier loop.
I'm working on it, elf!
Fritz bellowed, pulling out another explosive stick and working the wires into it.
I'm not the only one who can arm these damn explosives!
Take cover!
Helena screamed, shoving a Valley Elf bowman down and diving behind the wheels of the howitzer as a machine gun raked their position. Fritz cringed down, spitting more dirt and snow out of his lips as he plugged the blasting cap into place in the charge.
Fucking hell!
Don't let them get the charge in the gun!
Another human voice screamed out, a female this time, and all the southern elves and orcs switched their fire over towards Helena and Fritz, their cover ringing with the sound of bullets skipping off of steel.
Willie!
Fritz screamed, plugging the other end of the fuse into an M81 igniter.
Willie, get them off us!
Willie jerked his head towards Fritz after he was just going to react to Violet getting backhanded by the torqued human fighting Bubba, the woman slamming down to the ground with a cry. He grimaced, looked back to Alaska, Gabriel, the wounded Buckwheat, and Roxanne.
They need cover fire!
Willie shouted, pulling out a stick grenade and twisting the bottom cap.
Get some nades flying!
Oh, Roxanne, help me.
Buckwheat gasped out, his wounded hand making the twisting of the cap rather difficult. Roxanne placed her own grenade in her teeth and quickly unscrewed the cap to Buckwheat's, shrugging down as an explosion ripped through the other set of tents and set off a small powder cache. She took her grenade out of her teeth and spun the cap around, exposing the inner metal linkages attached to the dangling screw cap.
Where the fuck are your fingers?
I don't know,
Buckwheat shouted, gripping the cap with his wounded hand and letting his unmauled hand throw instead. Willie turned to Fritz, holding 2 grenades in his hands as a few auxiliaries fired stolen rifles beside them, their bows having become shattered by enemy fire.
Fritz, we're gonna throw and then you're gonna do what you gotta do.
Fritz looped a finger into the pull ring of the detonator, then called out to Helena and the other bowmen cowering around the gun.
You guys need to get the fuck out of here.
We'll move when the grenades go.
Helena answered back, holding another bowman's head still so she wouldn't try and look at Helena jamming a long loop of bandage into their gunshot wound.
Throw!
Willie screamed, hurling his 2 grenades at the same time like a pair of throwing hatchets. The air warbled with the sound of nearly a dozen stick grenades tumbling above the battle, sailing over the heads of Bubba and the torqued human. Bubba spat out a mouthful of blood, his lips and teeth bleeding from 3 solid strikes from the shield of the other human, but saw the grenades whirling overhead. He roared fairly and sprung forward, slashing at the human twice with his machete and drawing 2 thick grooves down the man's stomach and chest. The human staggered backwards long enough for Bubba to disengage and sprint towards the second gun, throwing down his machete and rugby tackling both Helena and the other wounded bowman over the sandbag wall that ran around the emplacement. Helena exhaled raggedly as she was carried through the air by the human and felt her bones rattle when he landed on top of them, Bubba having nearly 2 feet in height and 100 pounds over both the bowmen in his arms. The grenades went off in a rapid wave of detonations, but the semi-fixed ammunition of the M119 howitzers could not stand up to the multiple warheads that were tied to some of those stick grenades. The concussive blast bubble of the artillery rounds exploding blew everyone around it either apart, through, or over, depending on where they were. Most of the torqued humans were thrown bodily across the ground, rolling through the muddy snow while their troopers were blown apart, carried away in the blast wave and shrapnel. Willie and those around him were blown backwards, landing with pained exhales onto spent shell casings, crates, or each other. Helena cracked open her eye and looked over the shoulder of Bubba. Then her eye widened as she saw the ruined assembly of the 3rd M119 cartwheeling through the air and looming over them.
Human, we need to roll.
Helena screamed, scrabbling her boots on the snow as Bubba jerked his head around, catching just out the corner of his eye the slightly flaming artillery piece.
We need to roll now!
Bubba grunted, twisting with all the might his stomach muscles could muster, and rolled all 3 of them twice to the left as Fritz screamed and dove down towards the second gun, his finger still looped in the detonator's ring. The shattered M119 howitzer groaned as gravity took back its hold and plunged it down towards the ground. Its barrel thudded mutedly into the soil, and multiple other parts rattled away from the frame into the snow. Helena quickly skittered away from the coughing Bubba, snatching her bow back up from the snow and dusting herself off. The wounded bowman instead clutched herself to Bubba, eyes wide and shaking with fear as she stared at the spot where they were laying mere heartbeats before. "Radio to command!" The human that had been dueling both Violet and Bubba shouted, cutting his hand through the air as he slowly pulled a piece of steel out of his hip, throwing it across the ground with a dull ring.
Tell them we're under attack. Keep those guns firing, now.
Fritz wheezed up to his feet, pulling back on the ring with a pop of the fuse and then throwing the charge down the front of the barrel. He low jogged away and rolled over the top of the sandbags, coming down beside Willie as the rest of the humans and auxiliaries dived into cover with him.
That makes 3.
Fritz wheezed out again, all of them flinching as the barrel of the M119 exploded, completely bisecting it with a humorous thung of hollow metal hitting the ground. Willie nodded, poking his head over the top of the sandbags.
That leaves 3 more.
Torqued humans were picking themselves off the ground while the crewmen of the other guns quickly got back into gear, and it only took a couple of seconds for the next gun to fire. The pause was rapidly ending as sporadic gunfire sang back towards the Veil Riders, who in return leaned up and snapped shots back at them. "Buy time for the elves," the human shouted, picking up a long piece of steel and flourishing his dagger. "All humans to the front." Helena sighed out, closing her one good eye and touching her eye patch with a finger.
Oh God, it's not again.
Hold steady!
Yule roared, flicking his rifle and throwing an empty magazine across the ground.
Hold, men! Give me the knolls, now!
Hayden slammed into the trench wall beside Yule, rubbing at his dirt-flecked eyes with a palm.
Gnolls are already engaged. They nearly broke through the right flank, and the Gnolls are engaging the enemy along with our renegade orcs and other melee specialists.
God damn it. Yule growled, raising his rifle and firing at the flashes of muzzles that lay all through the distance. When the first smoke shells had landed, they were all prepared for the assault to come. The smoke shells landing behind them caused a huge issue as the wind was naturally blowing towards them and dragged the smoke over them in a thick blanket. The smoke shells landed nearly right in front of the trench before they suddenly stopped, and everyone started boiling into their positions, believing that the enemy was about to tall wheat right into their lines. Instead, they heard the engines of running vehicles and thundering feet out in the deepening darkness. First Sergeant Erinda Caine cleared a quick pocket of smoke and found herself staring down at a huge frontal assault and cried out a warning towards the entire trench. True to Yule's findings, the 2 other prongs, being stronger than the middle of the trident, had lured the enemy into pressing as hard as they could into the weakened center, while those on the wings only had to deal with light resistance that sought to merely hold them in place. The clash had been vicious as the trench line opened up, mowing down soldiers that were under the impression more smoke was coming, and the early leg of the assault went to those within the trench. That changed swiftly as the warcasters detected teleportation magic, and the magical offensive began in earnest. As machine guns rattled away into the night, balls of luminous fire and glittering cracks of lightning broke the darkness, incinerating bodies or ripping through flesh with sizzles of power. Some spells were but streaks of light, blinding anyone nearby and punching through bodies, armor, and vehicles alike. The teleportation magic birthed out entire companies of soldiers, mostly orcs and enemy gnolls that were supposed to go on the assault, as well as more riflemen in the form of humans and southern elves. The artillery fire was harsh at first, exploding through the trees or tearing through the trench line, but little by little, the artillery was losing its gusto. Yule, squinting his eyes as his mortars dropped rounds down through the trees at a high angle and harassed the enemies dug in positions, dropped his newly empty magazine, pulling out a spare from one of his side pouches. "Hayden," Yule called out, looking over to the human who was firing his own rifle. Hayden paused, looking over to Yule with eyes that flashed with the streaks of spells sailing across the battered assault lanes. Yule pursed his lips, then nodded. "Tell the men to affix bayonets and prepare for melee combat. I'm going to tell Alphonse to start dropping them within 50 yards of us. Everyone stays in the trench to avoid the shrapnel."
Yes, sir.
Hayden said with a nod, pulling his rifle off the top of the trench and taking off towards the other humans he knew would be around the radios. Yule looked out across the massive gun and spell battle happening around him and frowned, muttering to himself as his face flashed with the light of explosions and spell detonations. If I hold this, I win. If we keep the guns running, we will win, the human bellowed out, gripping his dagger tightly as the other humans fanned out around him.
They have too many wounded to stop us now.
Willie looked over his little group still hunkered down behind the sandbags. All but Helena were down when it came to the bowmen, either concussed, shot, dead, or suffering from shrapnel damage. The staglings were doing a good job of quickly hauling away the wounded, their agility keeping them hard targets to hit, and Willie was glad they were there. Willie looked over to Gabriel, whose tan face was marred by a deep scowl.
How many do we have? 9.
Gabriel muttered, jerking a thumb over his shoulder.
Helena's the last bowman not ripped up, and the staglings are playing medic. It's just us.
Violet nodded, gripping her warhammer tightly.
We can't just sit here and wait. We're only facing 11 humans anyway. We can do it. There's only 3 guns left with skeleton crews.
Those dudes are torqued.
Bubba murmured, tying off the bandage on his brother's hand.
They're gonna be stronger and faster than us.
Buckwheat grimaced with a pained exhale when his bandage was complete, looking down at his ruined hand.
No, they ain't.
All the humans and Helena looked at Buckwheat as he chuckled to himself. Even Alaska, who was having a bullet hole quickly magicked shut by Fritz.
We came through the veil,
Buckwheat said with a chuckle, leaning his head back against the sandbags as the artillery boomed around him.
We walked through with our heads held high and free. We were not short-lived. I know all of you have been feeling good. I've been feeling good. It feels like the veil has blessed us with something not even those necklace-wearing fucks have.
Bubba's face soured.
Did I give you too much morphine? Think about it, brother.
Buckwheat said with another laugh.
All of us have been doing things we should never be able to do. The sons of Odin are able to tap into magic. The Maori's tattoos glow. Hell, Hayden's spit can heal minor cuts. All of the humans outrun, outgun, and outlift the locals. Ask the elf, she'll tell you.
Bubba looked at Helena, and she nodded once.
You are all odd.
Even our brothers and enemy are doing shit that scare the fuck out of the locals. But didn't you ever wonder why some of the prisoners died of quickened age? I asked around, and when they refused for Mela, they died within a few days. The Veil is choosing its champions.
Buckwheat said with a pained wheeze, holding his wounded hand to his chest as he hefted his M16 rifle with the other.
We're its champions. We can do this. We're the ones who rode the Veil, not try and tame it. We are chosen.
Another cavalcade of artillery booms ripped the air. But Bubba stared down at his brother with a frown, his machete and the bayonet from his M14 in hand.
We can do this, brother,
Buckwheat said with a nod to Bubba.
We can take out these pretenders and save auxiliaries down the line. Who's coming with me?
Everyone around him nodded, even Fritz as he closed the last hole in Alaska with the last dregs of power from a wand.
Well, shit.
Violet muttered, racking the charging handle on her locally produced foul and slipping the bayonet into place.
Was good knowing you fellas.
Ride the veil,
Helena said in English, her eye twitching as all the humans' eyes snapped to her own, and she quietly wondered if she had said it wrong. Gabriel chuckled, responding back to her in English as he set down his sniper rifle and drew out a curved short sword.
Make 'em wail.
I'll throw in my last frag,
Buckwheat said, pulling out a last-ditch stick grenade from the inside of his plate carrier. He unscrewed the cap and let the metal linkage dangle, then took a deep breath.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
Moose said with a laugh, chugging down 3 oddly colored potions that glittered with faint light as everyone else readied their own last-ditch magical items. All of them hurtled over the sandbags, Helena pulling out her last 3 arrows on the run and lacing them into the upper chests of the first 3 torqued humans that came into view. Much to her annoyance and lack of surprise, the humans tanked the thick shafts with grimaced ease. So she drew out her broad fighting blade, having decided to remedy the issue from the last time she needed one. Buckwheat threw his grenade as Roxanne spun a ring around on her finger, the bubbling wave of magical energy boiling out around them as her protective shield came to life. She spun it again, and it broke with a melodic ting as the shield expanded further, encompassing all of them as the grenade cooked off at the feet of the other humans. While a few of the torqued humans stumbled or fell to the ground, the rest opened fire with their far more plentiful pool of ammunition, pummeling the protective shield. The bullets hit and deformed, streaking away into the air with warbling, shrill zings and streaks of light. Before the first magazines were dropped from their magazine wells, the lone wanderers and Helena were upon their enemy, the protective shield shattering like glass as they all squared off with their chosen foe. Helena teamed up with Roxanne, the 2 of them tackling a smaller-looking human together, while Alaska ended up dueling 2 torqued humans by himself, having summoned a poleaxe from somewhere on his person via magical means. Bubba and his brother were taking on the commanding human together, the 2 ducking and weaving as well as the other, the 3 engaged in a knife's edge margin of error. Willie, Fritz, and Gabriel were all entangled in extremely close-quarter battle, each grappling with their target with shuddering attacks from their heads and fists. Daggers and brass knuckles gleamed and danced in the bright reports of the artillery cannons, the flashes of light catching the metal as they were swung. Violet had already torn through her own opponent, the smaller woman having been easy prey for the long bayonet of the fowl, and was laying bleeding on the ground and numbly fumbling at the long, ragged tear along her neck and shoulder. As Helena held the arms of the human man from behind and squinted past the flecks of blood flying away from his face, Roxanne having pulled out her own enchanted knuckle duster, she tried to get a quick glance at the humans around her. She didn't see anything out of the ordinary when she looked around, nothing she hadn't already seen. But she saw it more in the female humans now that she focused in. Violet's eyes were bright with rage and bloodlust, her nose snarling as she tackled Willie's opponent, the 2 stabbing the human repeatedly even as the fallen man clawed at Willie's face, leaving deep, ragged grooves along Willie's cheek that wept blood like rain. Even Roxanne had an odd, mad glint to her eye, her arm muscles shuddering and rippling as she pounded again and again onto the man's face, spackling the pretty golden torque around his neck with blood, flesh, and bone. Was it true that the Veil chose those humans? Did they have something deeper inside of them that the other humans did not have? Helena dropped the dying, unconscious man from her arms and looked over to the struggling Fritz, shouting and growling out in panic as the human man on top of him pushed a fighting blade closer and closer to his neck. Perhaps not, or at least not for some.
Gabriel!
Fritz cried out, puffing air from his cheeks as he still fought against the wielded blade.
Gabriel, help! I'm busy at the fucking moment, Fritz!
Gabriel thundered as he leaned backwards and ducked another strike from his opponent, the scrappy human woman having a frightening amount of power and agility. Gabriel caught a slash across his thigh, but his shout of pain was silenced by a knee strike to his chest, the woman landing on top of him from the carrying force of her attack. Helena strode forward, ripping an arrow from the cool body of an orc as she picked her bow back up and laced the string to her cheek, aiming it at the side of the human's head as the dagger drifted an entire inch towards Fritz. The arrow cracked into the man's skull, shutting off his lights instantly, and he fell lifelessly onto Fritz. The lone wanderer's arms gave out that exact moment, and the blade thudded dully into an empty magazine.
Oh, fuck!
Fritz cried out in a panic, spluttering and spitting as cranial fluid and blood poured out onto his face and dribbled down both his cheek and chin.
Oh, God!
Alaska, dragging one man by his torque neck, stomped over to Gabriel and ripped the woman off of him, throwing her over the side of the sandbag wall like she was a toddler. Moose grabbed his own combatant by her feet, then swung her bodily into a crate, her spine snapping with an audible crack.
You alright?
Alaska asked down to Gabriel, now full-on squeezing the man's neck with crushing strength. Gabriel wheezed out a reply, but did not move, just blinking his eyes painfully. Gunshots rang out as bullets snapped through the air or skipped along the ground. Another torqued human trying to lace rounds into Willie as the two men collided, rolling across the ground. Helena, Roxanne, and Alaska dove for cover as the man continued firing, shredding the air with unaimed gunfire. 3 rounds impacted the body still laying on Fritz, and the human cried out in horror as more blood poured onto him, and he managed to wiggle a hand free to wipe his face and keep himself from drowning in the crimson flood. Violet waded in to even the odds for Willie, as 2 more humans had jumped on him, and Helena picked up a fallen rifle. She started ripping shots into any humans that were either running back towards the artillery guns or trying to gain space to use their rifles. The duel between Bubba, Buckwheat, the commanding human, and his subordinate was going as well as a rock being thrown at a wall. Bubba was hard of breath as he slashed at the man who was nearly the same height as he, leaning backwards as the man's backhand strike from his dagger hissed just in front of Bubba's neck. Buckwheat was having a harder time against a rather stocky and robust torqued human, the two trading punches and grappling with each other until they were both as gassed as the other 2 next to them. Every human was embroiled in some form of melee, trading blows, swipes, slices, and kicks. Helena was scrabbling along the ground for fallen magazines, firing at other humans who were fading back towards their vehicles or taking pot shots at the other artillery crewmen who were wavering. As Violet bit down onto the face of a man who was trying to stab Willie to death, Buckwheat's opponent finally got a good grip on his wounded hand and gave it a squeeze. Buckwheat let out a howl of pain, his body recoiling backwards out of pure instinct. This gave the snarling torqued human an opening, and he lunged forward, slamming Buckwheat with a crushing punch across the cheek and a second punch to the stomach, all the air in the man's lungs vacating immediately. Bubba turned his head enough to see the human pull out a pistol and acted without thinking, twisting and throwing his recovered machete sideways with practiced ease. As the blade sliced an open canal into the man's chest, Bubba's own opponent pulled out a revolver, his final stand weapon he had kept hidden under his uniform top. The man with an open lung staggered backwards, gasping out and ripping the machete free as he retreated. Buckwheat lay on the ground, still and motionless. The revolver barked, punching 3 .38 special-size holes through Bubba's body. 1 round slipped clean through his hip. The second's aim carried upwards by the recoil to punch through Bubba's lung as it slipped by his armor. Then the third clearing through his shoulder, cutting through the strap of his plate carrier. Bubba staggered backwards a couple steps, his boots slipping on the ground as he fell onto his back, his breath wheezing and eyes wide as the pain wrapped itself around his mind. The torqued human commander's coup de grace was interrupted by the sudden explosion of his last artillery pieces, and he spun around to see Helena and the gore-covered Fritz running for cover, the elf having dragged the man free in order to get both his opponent's magazines and allow him to trigger his already armed explosives.
Fuck!
He roared, pulling up his revolver and firing at the two. 1 round hit Helena square in the chest and carried her over a sandbag wall in a ragdoll, while the other clipped Fritz on the shoulder, the man screaming and falling to the ground in a roll. He looked around at his fire base and gave another yell of frustration, turning to look at the stricken Bubba before turning his back on the lone wanderer.
Fall back! Fall back, goddammit! Get to the trucks!
Whew, that was a long one, wasn't it? If you like this story and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Garbo's Field Desk. Spread the story around to those who you think would enjoy a little bit of extra spice in their workday and help pass the time by just a little bit faster. Be sure to join the coffee memberships. You get sneak peeks into the art, you get special roles in the Discord, you get sneak peeks of the chapters, and as well, I say your name at the end of the video. This is a thing people really enjoy. I don't get it, but hey, we're here. Going up before everyone else are the first shirts. These guys give $50 a month. That's E Machino, Cody Jarrow, Death's Dancer, and Insane Medic. These guys are keeping the lights on, the VA's paid, and my caffeine addiction well suited. Then there's the E4 Mafia. These guys give $25 a month. We have a new one, the Great Baguette. Welcome, Canadian ball, cannonball. The Great Baguette, Sonic Arrow, Splug the Goblin, Sanity Enjoyer, Darkside, Kiwi Bastard, Lacuna 8, Josh Beatty, Matty Boy, and Crusader 0625. Then there's Snuffy Squad at $5 per month. We got Super Stink 64, Elderock, Croman, Karina Kestrel, Henry DM, Dalek, Jules, Blonde Lord, Thrace Vega, Devin Schonholtz, Andrew, and Gale, Yeti Potatoes, Skelters, Kite Zero, Classy Cthulhu, Redro Uninspired, Diesel Dog, Coffee Commander, Anto, Inquisitor Matt, Duncan D, and Ein, the Lornsmith. I would say Lornsmith. Loresmith. Why Lorne? Until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Amanda, that was Fire, that was Rue, that was Technoward, that was Simba, that was Hailey, that was Vynn, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.